I was at a conference last week, a conference about group supervision. My main role, or what pays my mortgage at the moment, but I love it, is supporting clergy with pastoral supervision. And last week I was in a training course about group supervision. I've been experimenting for a wee while with story groups, and what I say to people is that we don't need to have written or told the story to find ourselves in it. You know, so sometimes hearing someone else's story unlocks things in us, and I'm hoping that will be the case today. I also have something for you to take away and perhaps share with one another. But after that conference last week, I wrote this. This will come out later, but I'm a fiddler, or actually violinist, because I play in a symphony orchestra, although I have played in Ceilidh bands. But I've been learning cello, so I'm a wannabe cellist. And this is what I wrote last week. I was thinking of my cello when I wrote it. We were talking about mirror neurons and how those are fired when we drop into empathy with someone. This is called resonance. Found in the deep bass notes, achieved by laying the fingers firmly on the strings and letting the bow dig in. Found too in the sweet high pitch of a harmonic, called forth by the lightest touch that gently coaxes out a beauty that may be lost to those whose hearing is dulled by all the background noise or the tiredness of tuning in. The initial sound is but a prelude to the depth that lingers beneath the surface, or the oscillation that continues to disturb long after the sound waves have stilled. We who listen are called to go there and invited to stay with the ripple that continues when the movement has stopped. So let me just share some bits from the book, which will take you further into that story. And I want to share the acknowledgements, which might sound strange, but the book is called Recovering Her Story. And the whole premise came to me one Holy Week when I was, it was the story of the Mary of Bethany, when she broke the alabaster jar and anointed Jesus, and how in each of the Gospels that becomes about the men in that story. And so I thought I want to recover her story, and a whole book's arisen out of it. So here are the acknowledgements. Giving thanks today for all those women who paved the way and on whose shoulders I have stood, for Sarah and her laughter, Hagar, who named God, Rebecca the trickster, and Leah the unloved, Athaliah, a queen with sass, and Jehoshaphat, the righteous one, Miriam, awesome sister, and Abigail, a prophet, Gomer, lover of men, and Bathsheba, creator of kings, Shiphrah and Puah, subversive midwives, Esther, the beautiful one, and Ruth, the faithful one, Naomi, the depressed, and Anna, the fulfilled, Dorcas and Martha, homemakers and creators, Mary, the willing, and Elizabeth, the wise, Julian, the passionate, and Hilda, the founder, Tenu, who birthed a saint, Teresa, who is one, those of the past and those of the present, wise women, witches, hags, and crones, birthing stories, birthing faith, hope, and love, and blazing a trail for women throughout the world. And then go on to saying how I think it matters who tells the story. The pages of history are littered with men telling the stories of women they barely knew, far less understood. They fill in the blanks and rub out the mystery and concoct a fiction that they may earnestly believe, but that bears little semblance of truth. Scripture too bears all the marks of redactors, whose bodies could not know the cycle of nature, the passion and beauty, the stretch marks and scars, the strength and the sacrifice, the complexity and compulsion of womanly wiles. And so the spaces are not allowed to be, for fear they will grow into a story untamed, beyond control of the raconteurs, with agendas to be met and canons to be constructed. And the stories of absent women are moulded and chiselled, made safe for the sharing, until a new generation emerges to break open those moulds and allow absence to be presence once more. So it's a story recounted in Numbers 27, telling of the daughters of Zelophehad, brave women who challenged the lawmakers of their day. It was the custom then that women weren't allowed to inherit, even if there were no male heirs. So when their father died, they took their petition to the priests, the leaders, and all the people gathered, and they won their case. But it took a lot of courage. And what is striking about their story is how it changed the law for all those who came after. So those women who fought not only for themselves, but for all the women who would find themselves in a similar predicament. And yet, still they are simply known as the daughters of Zelophehad. Well, their names are Mala, Noah, Hogla, Micah, and Tissa. And here's a part of my story. I know that feeling well, stepping into a room full of men. Men who have authority, men who have power. And it always takes courage, even now with years of practice. Mala, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, Tissa were women who knew their vulnerability and who stepped into their power. Leaving the place assigned them, they entered the arena. Armed with truth, they confronted the law, pleaded their case, were heard, and achieved change for themselves and for the women who followed. Not only did they confront power with knowledge and truth, they also held space for their sisters of the future. Victory is hollow, short-lived, unless it leads to lasting change. Called to be courageous, called to transform vulnerability into power, called to model sisterhood today. And the reason that story resonates so much for me is that, it'll be 30 years ago now, I was interviewed by a local committee to determine whether I was considered suitable to train for ordination in the church. Do you have a desire to preach? That was a question posed by 11 men seated round a man's lounge as they explored with me my sense of vocation to full-time ministry in the church. Do you have a desire to preach? My voice left me that night, both literally and metaphorically. I was unable to answer affirmatively the one question that mattered to them. This was not the first time, and sadly would not be the last time that I was silenced by men. Now, some 30 years on, despite going forward for selection without their blessing, I dare to call myself a preacher. A preacher in a great long line of women who preach, women who take the word, give it flesh, embody it, and share it wherever life takes them. Be it in Zumba class or belly dancing, in the supermarket or the nursery, in the pub or coffee shop, school or shipyard, sometimes even in the pulpit. Occasionally with words and more often in action. So that's just a wee smattering from the book, but let me tell you a wee bit more of that. That story you heard from 30 years ago was when I was going into ordained ministry with the Church of Scotland, and I served as a minister in the Church of Scotland for 27 years. And then God was doing a new thing. What happened was I came out of parish ministry, so serving a parish, into a national training role. And there's something, particularly in the Church of Scotland, when you're not in a parish, that your status changes, you become a threat to the people locally, you're working for the institution, which is the enemy, clearly. So I found it really difficult to find a place locally to be fed and to find community. And we lived 2 minutes away from the local Scottish Episcopal Church. So I thought, I'll go there, check out my options, I'll do a bit of healing and then I'll move on. And now I'm a priest in the Scottish Episcopal Church. I went through a process of discernment with them. The pandemic did slow things down, but a year ago, on the Feast of St Thomas, which was yesterday, I was ordained a priest in the Scottish Episcopal Church, because of course the Church of Scotland doesn't have bishops, so I had to be ordained. And let me just give you a funny aside to that. And when I was born, my twin brother was really seriously ill, so we were baptised in the hospital, in an emergency by the hospital chaplain. When my sister came along 4 years later, we were then taken to church along with her and baptised again. Clearly they didn't keep very good records. So I am the proud owner, if that's the word, 2 baptisms and 2 ordinations. But one of the things I wanted to share with you was when I was being interviewed by a panel from the Scottish Episcopal Church to see if I really was being called in this direction. I describe it as God wooing me. So it wasn't that there was a big fallout with the Church of Scotland, it was just that I discovered a different kind of spirituality in the Scottish Episcopal Church, something that involved all of me. And what I shared with the panel was, I play violin, I've been playing since I was 8, I think I'm reasonable, but since I took up cello, that's given a whole new dimension to what I do. There's so much more of me involved in the cello. It's much more demanding physically, the resonance that comes from it. It's just a whole different thing, and that's what it felt like going from a Presbyterian church where it seemed very much in my head to the Scottish Episcopal Church where I felt like I was worshipping God with all the senses, and particularly those senses we don't even know that we have. I feel that God wooed me into that, gave me a new lease of faith, and not a new vocation, it's that vocation to serve God, but a new way to live out that vocation. And so, as I said earlier, what I'm doing now mainly is in clergy support and training others to support clergy, and a non-stipendiary priest in a parish in South Ayrshire, which has been wonderful. I made copies of the very last poem in the book that I want to share with you today. I found a book called The Power of Belonging by Will van der Hart and Rob Waller, and what they say is, it is the struggle of the Stradivarius tree, the struggle for water, for light and for space, that makes it uniquely qualified to be crafted into a beautiful violin. And when I got to the end of this book and I had grappled with different women's stories, kind of imagining, it's part of my spiritual practice to imagine myself into the stories, I realised that each one of those stories had something of struggle and something of triumph in it. And so I wrote this reflection on that struggle of the Stradivarius tree. The trees at the edge of the forest that have not had to struggle for water and air, whose branches are plentiful, whose leaves are many, are too full of knots to make beautiful instruments. Only those that have struggled, forced to endure darkness, forced to grow thin and tall, forced to eschew branches to occupy less space, forced to seek the light, those are the trees chosen to be fashioned into beautiful instruments. For beauty insists that we go beyond what we can see, that we persistently look for that which is considered impossible. Beauty insists that we look deep within and call forth an ancient wisdom that refuses to settle for ordinary. And beautiful music requires discipline, many hours of patiently rehearsing the notes on the page, laying each one down, allowing even the discords to find their place, until, from the grit of persistence, transformation occurs, and out of brokenness emerges beauty, forged in love, sustained by care, a wholehearted offering to beautify the world.